welcome our second keynote speaker of the day and another terrific member of the SEDS USA Board of Advisors, James Muncy.
Thank you, Sam. This is an amazing turnout. I was at the very first SEDS conference in 1982 at George Washington University. That's where I met Bob Richards. I had already met Peter and Todd and others, but this is great. This is just awesome. I was at the last SEDS conference in Boston a few years ago at MIT, but it's great that you came back, and it's just amazing you got all these people out. I am not going to talk about the legislation that the Senate just passed on Tuesday and that the House is going to pass next week that I've been spending the last 3 years of my life working on. I know that Jeff Faust expected me to tell a lot of dirty details and stories here so that he could tweet about them and write them up in Space News, but I'm not going to do that. If you want to hear about that, my favorite drink is a double Bailey's over ice. And I will be available after the afternoon panel until you want to go to bed. I'd like to call out two young people. I was blessed as a young person to, for some reason, not be afraid of old people, and I would go up to them and talk to them and ask them questions, and they thought that I was impertinent, but curious and interesting, so they favored me with their time, and they advised me and gave me opportunities to make a difference. And so I've tried to do the same thing ever since I've been out in the world. And I've had a number of smart, young, creative people work with me or for me. And I'm very pleased to have my media associate, Sarah Preston here from American University, who's one of the leaders of SEDS there. And Connor Dugan from San Jose State University just left 2 years ago and is now working for Moon Express as a public policy associate for Moon Express, and he's a colleague there at that company. So I'm glad to work with Connor as well. So your future at PoliSpace. Okay, this is a blatant ad. I am looking for people, okay? I'm not looking for this many people, just for the record, okay? I'm looking for 1, 2, maybe 3 people to hire over the next year, because apparently this commercial space thing is catching on, and so there's more work to do. Let's see, how do I page now? So we call ourselves a space policy consultancy, but what we really are professional space advocates. Now, my vice president, Aaron Osterly, who's from UMich SEDS, would prefer that I say activists. And I don't have a problem with the word activist. I was an activist. So I'm still an activist. But I like advocates because it sounds a little bit more professional, and it's not just being active for the sake of being active, but actually pushing for something that you're serious about and thoughtful about and understand and are working towards. So, but that's what we are. We are in the advocacy business of pushing for our particular vision of space. We get paid to advocate to help enable the success of space companies and space projects. We have worked for some government clients in the past, but almost entirely our business now is directly for various commercial entrepreneurial space companies. We don't work for cost-plus contractors or work on cost-plus contracts. We're not interested in, trying to fight for a bigger piece of the pie of the old space regime. We're about inventing the new space regime. Not surprisingly for someone who co-founded the Space Frontier Foundation. Everyone in the company, at one level or another, has always, because they gravitated to me, and I sort of radiate this. We share a vision of an open frontier in space, of unleashing a hopeful and sustainable human civilization into the solar system. That's what we're about. That's what the company is about. That's the business we're in, is making that future happen. And the way we make that happen is we find companies that are working on some piece of that. They may not even realize that they're working on a piece of that vision. But they're working on something that is a piece of that vision. And we try to help them succeed in contributing that piece. Because the more people contributing more pieces, the faster we get there. And every client, every project, everything we do is hopefully another step towards our vision of space settlement. So those are our clients. We're actually adding some clients that are spaceports, so they would be down on the surface. We may lose one or two of these as well, but we have 4 companies that are primarily interested in the suborbital area. Maston, Orbital Outfitters, Virgin Galactic, and X-Corp. I've actually just finished my work for Virgin with this legislation passing. They may have me do other stuff in the future. X-Corp is my longest client, going back to 2003 and the original Commercial Space Launch Amendments Act. Orbital Outfitters, as you may know, is in the spacesuit business and now spacecraft testing business at their new facility they're building in Midland. Maston, of course, is not only the winner of the Northrop Grumman Lunar Lander Challenge, but and developer of vertical takeoff, vertical landing, unmanned, uncrewed reusable launch vehicles, but is currently a contractor for DARPA's XS-1 program that Mike Kelly told us about last night. Nanarax, you're hopefully familiar with, is the leader of commercializing the International Space Station. There's some company with X at the end of the name, I think you've heard of them. A company you probably haven't heard about is called Space VR, and they're launching a VR camera to ISS via Nanarax at the end of the year, early next year. And they're going to have the first virtual reality camera in space. It's going to be located at, it's kind of cool. The camera is basically looks like a 6-sided die with 2 very wide aperture cameras, basically GoPros, on each side, the sensors. And then it's going to be attached to the cupola in ISS using a 3D laser printed attachment tool that it's going to hook onto, and it's just going to stare out the cupola, you know, with all, you know, and as well as into the ISS. And you're going to be able to put on your own glasses with your Samsung smartphone or whatever VR system you come up with, and you'll be able to see what it looks like VR at the ISS. So everyone will share the overview effect. Everyone will be able to see it. So they are literally sharing spaceflight with everyone in a way that hasn't been done before. X-Corp, you probably know, has been working since 2007 on upper stage engine technology for ULA as well. Maston's actually been doing some interesting things with ULA on the moon, and of course Moon Express is one of the leading contenders for the Google Lunar X Prize, and is also very, very successfully pushing technology for very low cost, repeated sorties to the moon to do prospecting for volatiles. And of course, the Commercial Spaceflight Federation is the trade association for a lot of these companies that I've worked with since it got founded back in 2006. So now, I said that the clients are all somehow tied to space settlement, and if you go and you Google some of these company founders, Jeff Grayson, Elon Musk, Jeff Feige, Bob Richards, you can find lots of quotes about them talking about, say, space settlement, okay? But while some clients wouldn't say they're in the business of settling space, because it sounds a little woo-woo and their investors probably want them to focus on the widget that they're supposed to be developing. The fact is, if they are somehow making human spaceflight more profitable, either by lowering the cost of doing something in space or increasing the economic return of having people in space, then they are in fact delivering space settlement. My assumption is that space settlement is just the migration of human civilization into space. And the way we do most of what we do as human beings is through voluntary exchange of value, which is what we call capitalism and free enterprise. You know, where markets form and people buy and sell and produce and consume and exchange, okay? It's not some separate artificial thing off to the side from humanity. It's how we do things. It's how people exchange and give and contribute. And I would argue that people work today often to make a return, not because they want to have a fancy car, although that's obviously a good thing for some people, but they want to have money to go do things in the nonprofit community with their money. And they're going to go buy results that they want to produce in the world with their money. It's still capitalism. It's still an exchange. It's still commercial in that sense. It's just that the provider of the service of creating that changed or improved reality doesn't have to make a profit. And they don't share, and they don't have equity, and they don't, share. But they absolutely have customers. The donors are absolutely the customers, or the volunteers are the customers, and they absolutely have to go satisfied. So I'm just going to assume that space settlement is enabled by the economic development of space. In that case, there are basically three ingredients to space settlement. One is a new or better private space good or service. And in fact, an entire ecosystem of those. Constantly bubbling, churning, advancing, replacing old services with new services, old products with new products, exactly the way we do on the real economy here on the ground. Even we call it the real economy, like the space economy is not the real economy. Of course it's the real economy, we just haven't been acting that way. Then there's funding. Customers, investors, partners, who will fund the maturation of the technology you need, the development of the product you need, the checkout of the service you need, the hiring of the human capital you need. Money is a key ingredient, as well as the idea. And then there's permission. You have to have permission. Now you may think that that's strange, that you should have to get permission. Well, the fact is if you form a business on the ground, there's probably somebody you need to ask permission. There's somebody whether you're going to be operating a small factory in an industrial park, and you need to make sure that it's zoned for you to do that kind of production there, or you want to hire a bunch of people. You have to make sure that you fill out all the forms for hiring a bunch of people. You also need permission in space. And the reason you need permission in space is the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 says that the federal government, all governments, all nation states, they call them states, all states will authorize and continually supervise the activities of their private entities under their jurisdiction. That means the U.S. government is liable, literally, in international court for what you do in space. So they want to know what you're going to do in space. They want to give you permission, they want to promote it, they want to enable it, but they want to know. And depending on whether or not you want to launch a launch vehicle, or put up a communication satellite, or launch a remote sensing satellite, or even go to the moon, somebody wants to know something about that, and you need permission. So the problems we solve, I should say, mostly what we do is we work in the zones of 2 and 3. We may help people with their ideas in 1, but we mostly work in the zones of 2 and 3, so that 1 can actually be tried out. These are the kinds of problems we solve. Regulation. Are you allowed to do what you want to do the way you want to do it? Okay? Company I used to work for had a great idea. Absolutely the right way to do cargo delivery to the International Space Station. It was intermodal. It could use any launch vehicle. It used a standardized cargo container that could be integrated onto any launch vehicle. There was a minor technical requirement for the upper stage that the upper stage had to be able to hold the cargo container steady in 3 axes. But then a space tug, a ISS qualified space tug would come get the cargo module and take the cargo to the ISS. So instead of imagining that a supertanker or a big cargo ship is capable of steering itself out of harbor and then efficiently across the ocean and then into harbor at the next cargo port, you have tugboats that move it the last mile. And then it very efficiently carries a lot of cargo across the sea. The only problem was the only proven way of doing that was to use Russian technology on the Russian side of the space station. Big policy problems. Government funding. Can some government agency that you want to work with, that you want to sell something to, that you want to partner with, that would benefit from your developing a capability, do they have the money available to them? Are they allowed to spend it on you? If, in fact, you want to work with that government agency. Some companies don't want to work with the government. That's great. I'm for that. But in the marketplace called low Earth orbit, the government is right in the middle of the marketplace, spending, depending on how you count it, $4 to $8 billion a year. So you can ignore all that economic activity and the distorting effects it has on goods and services that you're trying to enter into and start doing things. You know, you can say, I don't want to be part of ISS, I don't want to talk to NASA, I don't want any of this, I just want to go build my own space station and do my own thing. Great, if you have the money, wonderful, do it, please. Okay? If you don't, then you're trying to figure out how do you carve off a little piece of what NASA's doing for you to make a contribution, a value-added contribution, and make money, deliver a return to investors, and move forward in your company's capability so that you could launch a space station of your own someday. Government acquisition. Influencing what the government wants to buy and how they are going to buy it. Do you think that it was just automatic that NASA woke up one day and said, we are going to use innovative contracting methods where we give up most of the control we have as government program managers to partner with private companies to develop human spaceflight capabilities? You would be wrong if you thought that. And I would like some of the drugs you're on, please. But you can't just assume that NASA has the money or DARPA has the money or whatever, and then just assume that they will spend it correctly and do the right thing to accomplish the goal. You might think that they're actually rewarded based on whether or not they accomplish something in space. With the exception of DARPA, and you would be wrong. Legislation. Sometimes you literally need to give the government agency permission to help you. Or you need to prevent government from hurting you. You need to actually change the law. Back in 2004, when we wrote the Commercial Space Launch Amendments Act, we created this thing called an experimental permit for reusable launch vehicles. But the way we did it, and it made sense at the time, I wasn't focused on it because I didn't think it was that important, but it was a good idea, and it was beneficial. The idea was you would do R&D and test with a reusable launch vehicle initially, but then you were going to put it into operational service. So the idea was you would get a permit, and then you would go move into licensed flight, and you would never go back to permit status. You would always just use your license from then on. Well, it turns out that sometimes companies want to actually make a tweak to their design and go back and test it under the permit regime, under the less stringent, less burdensome permit regime. Or they may have a deal with a company where one company is testing and they want to go ahead and get their license for their operational system, but the way the law was written, once the license is issued, the permit's invalid. Well, the last thing they wanted to do was cut off the R&D, even though they were getting the license done. So the law that the Senate passed on Tuesday, it's going to go to the House next week, fixes that. But that sometimes you just need to, literally the FAA cannot let you keep or give you an experimental permit if they've already given you a license. It's just in the law. It's not, it was stupid in hindsight. We're not all smart. And we're definitely not all perfectly foresighted. Policy. And I don't mean the broad topic of policy, icky non-engineering stuff. I mean actual public policy, actual national policy, whether it's crafted by a White House or crafted in law by a Congress, actually determining what are our goals supposed to be in civil space or military space or commercial space. What's the strategy, overarching strategy as a country for achieving those goals? Media, obviously, throwing a spotlight on events and situations that you want talked about, and then public debate, winning the war of ideas. So, I've talked a little bit about CSLA already, but it's a good example. The bottom line was, we didn't know how to do human spaceflight radically safer than NASA did. NASA flew the shuttle a grand total of 135 times, twice unsuccessfully. We wanted to have vehicles that could be much safer, and not just much safer theoretically, but much safer demonstrably, because they were going to fly thousands of times. Okay? And you would actually start to get real statistical information about how reliable propulsion technologies were, design concepts were, etc. So, but in order to fly thousands of times, you have to get paid to fly. No one has the money to just go fly and test something ad nauseum without some revenue for it, just to prove that your design is safer. So the question was, how do we let people fly customers into space for money, telling them that they could die, telling them the actual demonstrated safety record of the vehicle they're getting on, and then primarily focus on protecting the uninvolved public, as we already do in space transportation in this country. And it was not, this was literally 2 months after, a few months after Columbia that we started the effort to pass this law. But we were able to get Congress at a time in which they were telling NASA, take your time, spend billions of dollars extra, and be very, very safe with the astronauts. They let the private sector go fly people at their own risk, as long as they were informed of the risks, and while there was a promotional authority to regulate, they specifically limited regulation to only based on actual demonstrated problems for some period of time, which has more recently been called the learning period, and which was extended by the bill on Tuesday until 2023, the AAT. Turning over the most sacred activity NASA does, flying astronauts, not just people, astronauts, into space. Turning that over to upstart entrepreneurs while you're retiring the space shuttle, when the president has canceled the Constellation program, and when the innovative commercial partners that are developing cargo systems haven't flown anything yet, or in the case of SpaceX, had only flown the Falcon 1 successfully twice, was a big challenge. There were resources issues. Can NASA have enough money for commercial crew to do the job? Would it have the flexibility? Would it be allowed to invest in multiple partners instead of just one? Can NASA bring itself to enable private companies instead of controlling them and telling them how to do it, as they do with standard contracts? Could NASA use powerful and flexible tools like Space Act agreements to fund the development of these capabilities? Those were all big fights. It doesn't happen automatically. You know, those of you who want to go work on inventing Dragon V3 have to understand that that's what lets you go do things innovative. This is what lets you go do innovative things. And then just quickly, in 2010, the president canceled Constellation, which is a program to go to the moon and Mars. He dissed returning NASA astronauts to the moon at a speech at the Kennedy Space Center that I was president at, and set the goal of visiting an asteroid and then Mars. Congress then said, oh, well, NASA, we're going to make you go develop a heavy lift launch vehicle like the one you canceled, because we're going to need that for going to the moon and Mars. Even though we're not going to the moon, we're still want one. And we're not going to be going to Mars for 20 years, but we still want one. So we want one. NASA cannot, in the realities of the budget, the way NASA, especially the way NASA develops things, it is not possible to afford a lunar lander or any lander for humans. So NASA came up with the asteroid recovery and redirect mission. I think that's right. Congress hated it and wanted to do the moon. So 2 years ago, I got the bright idea in my head that I would go do shuttle diplomacy, which is a term from before you were born, when Henry Kissinger went back and forth between Egypt and Israel to cut initial peace deals in the Middle East. Literally flying back and forth between Jerusalem and the capital of Egypt, in Cairo. I went back and forth between the House Republicans who still wanted to go to the moon and the White House, and got them to agree, believe it or not, that NASA could invest some monies in partnering with private companies like my client Moon Express on the economic development of the moon. Now, details to follow. That was just the start. We got a little more money in the budget last year. NASA, of course, didn't do the right thing with it. So the game goes on. But, you know, Gerstenmaier said it is really important to NASA to figure out whether or not we can get water off the moon to use as rocket fuel to make it cheaper to go to Mars. I just saw a chart that he gave recently that basically said half of the mass can come from using lunar surface and other stuff. It would make a big difference if we commercially develop the moon while the government can't afford to do it itself. So if any of this sounds like fun to you, even if you're pure scientists and engineers who have to operate within the space policy framework, why not learn something about how it works and how it doesn't work before it kills your dream project or your dream company? As much as I would love you to call me in 10 years when you have a few $1 million in investment and want to hire me to solve your problem, if you are interested, you might get to learn something about policy up front and factor that into your plans, your systems engineering for how you want to go build whatever you want to go build. Those are things that former PoliSpace staffers are doing now, and that's how to reach me. Now let's go figure out how we're going to all get rich with asteroids and new planets, because I think that's more